So first of all, the first verse says the prophecy that Habakkuk the prophet received. We don't know anything about Habakkuk apart from what's in this book. No reference to him outside of this book, and he doesn't make any reference to any kings that he was prophesying under, as other prophets do. But we can work out from the content of his prophecy that it was given sometime before the Babylonians came and destroyed the temple in Jerusalem and took the Jewish people into captivity. Sometime in the last days, if you like, of the kings of Judah in Jerusalem, probably after the death of the godly king Josiah, who made many reforms and brought the country back to some form of obedience to the Lord after the reign of a very wicked king called Manasseh. But after Josiah died, things went back to bad ways and in fact went from as they were really, and things were going from bad to worse. And it was about this time that the prophet Habakkuk is prophesying. And the book is actually a kind of conversation between the prophet and the Lord about the state of things, and the prophet's really asking God, what are you going to do about it? And God tells him. And I believe that it does apply in some ways to our situation now. He was looking for the coming of judgment coming upon Judah and how to respond. And we can see many parallels in the coming judgment on the earth in the events of the last days leading up to the second coming of Jesus the Messiah. So, verses 2 to 4 then. The prophet says, how long shall I cry out and you will not hear? How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. Their strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. So he's looking at his society and he's lamenting over the situation. Sees destruction and violence all around him. He sees the law paralyzed, justice not going forward. The wicked are surrounding the righteous and hemming them in, and the righteous are being oppressed by the wicked society around them, and nobody seems to care and nobody seems to do anything. And it just seems that the wicked have their way and the righteous are oppressed by them, and justice is perverted. And he says, God, why don't you do something about it? Cries out to God to help and to answer his prayer, because he thinks things are going from bad to worse. God, surely you're going to intervene and save us from this situation. And you could say, if you look around our world, it's pretty much the same, isn't it? You see violence everywhere. You see the wicked surrounding the righteous. You see justice not going forward in situation after situation, and people being oppressed by the evil and the wickedness around them. And Christians and others crying out to God to help and to save us from this situation and to redeem us and make society better, if you like, make us to live in a better world in which there is justice and in which there is a holding back of the violence. And so he's saying, when will God act? Will God act? And so then we have the Lord's reply, verses 5 through to 11. God gives his answer to this prayer. It says, look among the nations and watch, be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days which you would not believe, though it were told you. For I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation, which marches through the breadth of the earth to possess dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity proceed from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and more fierce than evening wolves. Their chargers charge ahead, their cavalry comes from afar. They fly as the eagle that hastens to eat. They all come for violence. They set their faces like the east wind. They gather captives like the sand. They scoff at kings, and princes are scorned by them. They deride every stronghold, for they heap up earthen mounds and seize it. Then his mind changes and he transgresses. He commits offense, ascribing this power to God. You could sum up that answer briefly by saying the Lord says you ain't seen nothing yet. If you think it's bad now, something much worse is coming. What's coming actually is an invasion which is going to come from the Chaldeans or the Babylonians. They're going to bring a violent oppression and a destruction of your society and an occupation of your people. And we know from history that what happened was that the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, did invade Judea. They destroyed Jerusalem, they destroyed the temple, and they took the Jewish people into captivity in Babylon, leaving just a few behind in the land. It was the greatest disaster which had happened to the Jewish people since their coming into the land at the time of Joshua. And the prophet's actually saying, and what all of the prophets are saying, is that God is going to allow this disaster because you haven't been doing what I told you to do, basically. God gave them the Torah. God said, this is how I want you to live. I want you to worship me, one God, keep my commandments, act justice, behave righteously, keep my commandments and do them. And you've done the opposite. You failed to do that. And therefore, I'm going to allow the Chaldeans to come upon you as a judgment to chastise you and to bring you back to myself. And so that is God's purpose in it. Interesting, the last verse there in verse 11, it says, he commits offense, ascribing this power to his God. The pagan view in ancient world was that if you defeated another people, it was because your God was stronger than their God. And these people still have that kind of idea today. If you hear Muslims saying Allah Akbar, they're not actually saying God is great, they're saying God is greater. And Allah Akbar means that our God is greater than your God. And if we triumph, it's because our God is greater than your God. And therefore, when Muslims come against Christians, they're saying that our God is the true God, and your God is not the true God, and we're triumphing over you. Therefore, you should believe what we believe in Allah. Which is not true, because our God is much greater than Allah. But that's what they believe. And that's what these pagans were believing, and what the Babylonians would believe, was that the reason why they had conquered over Judea was that they had the true God, and that they were triumphing over Judah, which had a non-God or a false God. God's telling them actually that's not the case. That is a wrong assessment of what's happening. Judah actually has the true God. The reason why God is allowing them to triumph over them is because Judah is not being true to their God. And that also has an application to us in our Christian situation, if you like. One of the reasons actually why God allows Christians to be downplayed is because Christians have not been true to their God. And we have to be true to our God if we're going to have the victory over the false gods around us. So if you want a victory over another people, it's because your God was stronger than their God. And in the case of Babylon, they attributed their victory over Israel as a sign that their God was stronger. And so they were able to destroy Judah, destroy the temple, and take the Jewish people into captivity. But God actually says, no, that's not the case. I allowed this to happen as a chastisement of my people because they were unfaithful to their true God. My purpose actually is to correct them for what they were doing wrong. When you come to the book of Daniel, which tells you what happens when the Jews are in Babylon, it shows in the book of Daniel that actually Daniel's God, the true God, the God of Israel, is stronger than the gods of Babylon. And over again, you have conflicts, if you like, between Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians and Daniel and his God. Every one of those, Daniel's God comes out as the victor. Think of the Nebuchadnezzar's image, and the boys are thrown into the burning fiery furnace, and they see 3 men in the burning furnace and a 4th man who is with them, and they come out unscathed. And Nebuchadnezzar actually says, this shows that your God is actually the true God. And over and again, God is going to show through the events which follow that the true God is the God of his people, the God of Israel, God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. When it comes to the conflict and the end, he's going to have the victory. And God shows by a series of signs and wonders his superiority actually over the gods of Babylon. But as far as the Babylonians are concerned, and as far as what is going to happen in the immediate future, there's going to be this time of occupation, this time of trouble, and this time when they're going to be taken into captivity. And thinking about our time, things are bad now. But actually God's saying, to be honest, he's saying to the world and to us, you ain't seen nothing yet. There is a time coming which is much more terrible than any that has been before. It's called the Great Tribulation. A lot of people don't like to talk about it, and a lot of people don't like to think about prophecy because I think it's all doom and gloom, because there is a doom and gloom part about it. There's also a glorious hope in the coming of Jesus. But we can't avoid the fact that the Bible tells us that this age is going to end not with the triumph of Christianity and the world being Christianized by some great revival. It's going to end with a time of great tribulation unlike any that has been before or ever shall be. And I believe there are many signs which show us that we're on the way to that. How soon it will come, we don't know. But there are things happening now which are pushing the world in that direction. And so we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of the fact that the world situation today is going from bad to worse, and it will end up with something which is uniquely bad in the time of the Great Tribulation. Matthew 24 describes it. Jeremiah 30 describes it as a time of Jacob's trouble, again a time of trouble unlike any that has been before or ever shall be. So these people, these Babylonians, they've been raised up, they scoff at kings, and they take possession of other people's countries, and they have great power. But God has raised them up for judgment, and they will be brought down to nothing. In the process of correcting, purpose is going to go on in God's people for their salvation. And they're going to turn from false gods to the true God revealed in Jesus, the Messiah.